Good evening, Beirut. Good morning, America. We are extremely proud and pleased this evening to host one of our former students in Haigazian, Nishan Kazazian, who is with us from New York. And we are also happy to be hosting as well our faculty member, Ziad, Suidan from Atlanta. And I'm so happy that all of you could join us this evening for this virtual, I'm not going to call it a lecture, but rather this virtual conversation, because it is going to be probably a trip down memory lane, and it will be a little bit diverse and with a little bit of spices from our lecturer. Let me introduce Nishan. Nishan is a former Haigazian student, as I mentioned. He joined Haigazian in '68. He was very active. And you know, he will share with you some of these pictures from folk dance to any kind of activity you can think of. Then he goes to AUB and graduates in '71 with distinction in fine arts, which reminds us that I was a classmate, and we are celebrating our 50th anniversary of our BA this year. So we're almost a jubilee generation. After receiving his BA, and he does one more year as a teaching diploma in art and education. And then as a Fulbright fellow, he leaves for the United States and goes to Columbia, where he receives 2 masters, one master in art and art education and one in architecture. Now, he continues his career in 2 parallel fields, one as a licensed architect and one as an educator. He's teaching in Columbia, City University, New York Tech University. He's all over the place, you know, and I'm sure that Parsons, his students, I'm sure, had a fantastic and still have a love affair with his classes, you know. As an architect, he works out of Manhattan and East Hampton. He describes his work as his art is about expressiveness, resilience, endurance, transformation, and rejuvenation. His architecture engages with societal, environmental, and functional needs. I'm not going to spend more time introducing him, because his presentation, I think, is a biography, and it will go into these different stages. Now, to lead us, our guide in this conversation lecture is our Professor Ziad Suidan, who is a graduate of Wisconsin University in comparative literature. He's a faculty member with us in literature and intercultural studies. And what I will do is give over to him now the floor, the screen, the microphone, and he will take over from then on. I'd like to thank you, and remember that at the very end of this, we will have an open forum for the questions and discussion, more than what will be going on among the 3 of us. Thank you for being with us, and Ziad, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Akmakshi. I wanted to first thank the Dean and the Haigazian family and community for embracing the project of bringing Nishan Kazazian and his art back to one of his homes, virtually speaking. I also would like to recognize the intellectual and global network of intellectual care that has made this talk possible. One of the reasons I bring this question of care and the network of possibility up is also related to the second means by which I will contextualize the necessity for having asked Nishan if he would be willing to come and share his artistic project.
Thank you, Ziad. Thank you, Arda. Thank you, seeing you after such a long time. Thank you for your introduction. Thank you, Ziad, for your comments. And first, I would like to thank Haigazian University, Professor Arda Akmakchi and Ziad Suidan for inviting me to present here today. I believe the pandemic represents an accumulation of many historical events. With that in mind, I will talk about my history and experiences, starting with my early years in Haigazian, to which I owe being here today. Thank you. My works have always mirrored and reflected my surroundings, be they social, geographic, or personal. Further, I have always attempted to deconstruct, reconstruct, and transform troubled circumstances and situations and give them more positive interpretations. This aquarelle, one of my early works, has many layers to it. The title, Doomsday Diaspora Rejuvenation, is a work of my early works that concerns about transformation. The work was done when I was still in high school and shown at AUB while I was at Haigazian and given as a wedding gift to two Haigazian librarians, Girair and Ziad Tanyelian. So as you see, many layers and coincidences in this work. And as you also see, the names of other participants, Paul Gregosian and Lucy Tutinjian, Krikor Bomjan, and others. So this was a show at AUB. Well, I wasn't there yet, but I was at Haigazian. I would like to talk about the so-called Lebanese Golden Age from 60s to mid-70s. Was a period of intense excitement to which Haigazian Rocket Society was a contributor, major contributor. This is the period when I was at Haigazian, 66 to 68. The images show the mood reflected in the college, music, drama, dance, etc. Some of the names that, or the people that you see over there that you might still remember. Note the photo of advertisement, which is interestingly, it's on clothespin. This is the Haigazian, if you see the Haigazian building in the background. So I did I designed this, I put this advertisement for one of our activities at Haigazian. Now, I would like to talk some of my experiences at Haigazian. I would like to talk about two memorable teachers that they had major impact on me. I digitally recreated this scene of our English class with Miss Ohannessian in 1967. I went to class early and turned the chairs and tables upside down before anyone else came. Many of my classmates got really mad at me. But when Miss Ohannessian came to class, she said, great installation. Let us talk about this today. She was able to diffuse the situation by turning it into fascinating class of discussion and interpretation rather than confrontation. I doubt another teacher would have been able to do what she did. This happens to be one of my first installations. I also would like to talk about Dr. Harry van Mierlo. I wish I had his picture here. He was another remarkable teacher from a prominent foreign family in Holland. He taught psychology at Haigazian and recounted his experience in the Dutch underground fighting Nazis with his wife. His wife was killed, he survived. In Beiruit, he helped Palestinian refugees while simultaneously helping to save the life of Jews being persecuted and even hanged in Iraq. He told me he received a letter of thanks from the Israeli government for helping the Jews of Iraq that was sent to his address in Holland. Even though the Israeli government knew of his political views and his actions in helping the Palestinians. He also talked extensively about his writings on power and manipulation, which taught me about how human relationships work. These meetings and encounters at Haigazian shaped my richer thoughts and awareness of different social and political issues. AUB. The top right sculpture, رأسة السياسيين, Dance of Politicians, is probably as valid today in Lebanon as it was 50 years ago, and even before that. This does not require any further explanation from me. This was published on Nahar. The article was written by Ramzi Rihani. The lower left sculpture, Harriye, represents a desire to be free of social confines, from being labeled or categorized. The split of form in the sculpture represent belonging and not belonging, being separate but also connected. These are themes and ideas that have continued throughout my works. I have practiced breaking and putting things back together since my youth. Being separate but also connected in these ceramics, it shows on the top, the broken part still attached. They were photographed in front of the Jaffet Library, and unfortunately these pieces are lost now. The lower images are of broken and discarded machine pieces. Their shadows painted in acrylic on wood and attached on plexiglass panels. They reflect the multiple layers of interpretation I deal with. They are broken, but still alive. I consider the piece on top to be the precursor of my later works, a box with plexiglass cover that shapes has shapes and lines on them, on the base and on the side. As the light moves, shadows and reflections create new stories and reinterpretations, while the previous experiences become memories. As it is viewed from different angles, they project multiple stories. I have no idea where this idea came from. Were the forms and shape inspired by my grandmother's Maraj embroidery below? At this time, I had taken greater interest in family heirlooms. My surviving grandmother's stories about her embroidery, this one, intrigued me intensely. The names, the motifs, their significance, and the way they embroidered the piece was produced. I wanted to adapt and give a new life to this embroidery with a necklace. The lanyard was embroidered by my grandmother. Unfortunately, this piece is lost as well. But it may have helped inspire other artworks later on. I worked for a year with delinquent girls in Beiruit. As the articles describe, these were teenage girls in prison. Some were homeless, some were convicted for murdering their rapists, and others for petty crimes. I taught them art therapy in Arabic. In contrast to luxury, to the golden age we were living in Lebanon, this was the other side of Lebanon. The Good Shepherd sisters, Bon Pasteur, took care of them in their complex incidental field. In order to develop awareness of their plight, I organized a show of their work at Gallery Underground across from AUB. As the poster of the exhibit on the left shows, the exhibit was called Change. I worked with each girl individually. Some of these images reflect their trauma. However, I also developed collaborative projects for them to experience their sense of belonging and connectedness to each other. They made animals, figures, and then we put them together and created a zoo on lower left. That each girl, it's kind of the different animals, and then we put them together. They made fruits that they wished to have or they liked from paper, colored paper. And then we combined them together. We made a mobile. It shows on the right. These were AUB students who helped me. There were quite a few AUB students who helped me. I don't know what happened to them. They were all giving their time to put the show together. Now, the central piece, lower central piece, they made a TV with wire. And each girl chose a singer that they admired, like Feiruz, Sabah, Samira Tofi, Tarub, and others. So they made their figurines in wire and cellophane paper, and then we combined them together in the TV set, which is, unfortunately, it's not as clear, but that's the only slide I have. Working with these girls had a major impact in the future of my works, including having extensive discussions with the director, Sister Colette Horani, who I remember fondly. Aside from those influences, I've had other influences from Lebanon, biblos, layers of successive civilizations unearthed side by side from 8000 BC onward, temples of obelisks next to Crusader Castle, and in town near the ruins, a church next to a mosque. And in later years, the performance of Mashrou Leila, whose electropop anthems about political freedom, race, and sexuality, challenging the status quo, added another layer to this place. This unique place has provided powerful inspirations for my work. In addition to biblos, Beiruit, as I have talked on the panel that I organized at the American Institute of Architects in 2013, has added another layer of inspiration to my works. The social interaction between different socioeconomic groups is also reflected in the houses of worship, built very close to each other, as well as their close visual proximity to the parliament, the Grand Serai, and iconic historic structures. You can see the mosque, the churches, and synagogue side by side. United States. This ceramic sculpture is one of my first pieces in the United States, which I believe carries characteristics of Beiruit works that I carried to New York City. However, unlike those earlier works, this piece is broken, but firmly attached to its foundation. These ceramic sculptures are reminiscent of Middle Eastern objects, such as drums. However, they are separated but propagating. My first solo show in Nantucket, Massachusetts in 1979. While I was preparing this talk, somehow I went to the guest book from that period. Someone wrote, "If there was no such thing as shadows, your boxes would have been empty." Someone else called it a play of space. Another wrote, "Moments of suspension." And another, "Powerful works of art." And then wondered, if this somehow reflects some of the residual consciousness in the Armenian people of the tragedy of the terrible slaughter by the Turks. I wonder if my name was not Armenian, what would have been, how this would have been interpreted. Back to ceramic sculptures. In later years, I surprisingly discovered the Japanese practice of kintsugi, repairing broken pottery, that reflects some of the methods I employ in my artworks. By emphasizing the object's fractures and breaks, instead of hiding them, kintsugi often makes the repaired piece more beautiful than the original. The blending together of contradictory materials, such as wood and fired clay, reflects the ongoing exploration of the ideas of belonging and not belonging, of rejection and the push for acceptance. Putting totally incompatible materials together and making the result work aesthetically is a metaphor with multiple interpretations. This series of prismatic drawings represent the construction, deconstruction, and reconstruction of spaces. They derive from my experience of challenging rules and playing with form and volume. Forms and colors create a three-dimensional dynamism that speaks of confrontation, change, and adaptation. A single plane unfolds, generating new planes within the same form, which can be seen and interpreted ambiguously. Each possibility exists with the other, creating a sense of puzzlement and how to experience the object. These works were done in 1980s, during the early period of AIDS crisis in New York City, which in many ways resembled the unknown fears of the COVID pandemic today. These are similar to the previous wood constructions, which have color added. Look at the openings, and which possibly gives new hope, unexpected expectations, or whatever, however you want to see it. As in other projects, origami, kerigami, and other paper cutout elements from various cultures play a role in these structures, in which one can experience space and interpret objects in multiple ways. Ambiguity and personal interpretation of the objects and participation has always been a theme in my work. I call these landfill dialogues, discarded objects wrapped in clay to create the impression of humanoid forms. I think of them as trash, talking back to us about our excess and its effect on the environment. These are literally flat, but throw us into spaces that are layered. This series reflects the experiencing of the Lebanese civil war from afar by via TV news. That's why I call it Civil War drawings. This video is dedicated to the September 11th incident in New York City. Computer animated representation of silent, emotionless mannequins raise their heads when a terrible incident occurs, look around, and then go back to their daily routines, oblivious to the suffering around them. Endless cycle with a question mark. Will it ever end? An animated image in which a ziggurat constructed of contemporary flags of nations of the world is transformed and dissolved. The progress dissolution of the image suggests themes of national identity, warfare, and shared humanity. After my parents passed away, I began exploring my family roots. The Kazazian family tree, both paternal and maternal, which is very rare, is on the left. The photos on the right, each of which has its own story, include my great-grandparent Sarkis Samvelian with his wife, his family, and his students, and teachers at Marash College, where he was principal. He was killed in the genocide with his oldest son, and the rest of the family went into exile around the world. After many years of separation, members of the family reunited in Beiruit, which I called the meeting place of hearts and minds. The 2013 panel that I organized at the American Institute of Architects was titled Beiruit Now, Urban Landscapes, Conflicting Desires, which I believe is still valid now. The reunion, I showed this as a reunion in Beiruit at that panel. The reunion inspired the work on the left, which shows fragmented parts of the larger form situated in these different global settings, creating a sense of psychological connections between nations. These are examples of the kind of connections I am talking about. These memorial bridges end nowhere, but continue somewhere else in another location. This image of digital installation published in the Art et Dossier magazine in 2019 combines historical photos of my family with a real place, Gerald Drive in East Hampton. They all come together virtually as a form of resilience in a view from Jackson Pollock's studio. The following 5 slides were some of the observations that I made as a discussant at Harvard University's Genocide Project at the City University of New York in 2011. I'm showing exactly what I showed there. Identity as a paradigm of cross-cultural interactions and how this can be integrated in art and architecture. Interactions of art and architecture and commercial links as cultural crossroads in which creative ideas and ways of life are carried to other places and diffused. 13th century church Beiruit in Armenia. Three-card prayer niches represent Hindu, Muslim, Jewish faiths side by side, illustrating interconnectedness as well as respect for other religions. Details of the niches that I photographed, unfortunately, or whatever reason, we haven't heard about this. This interconnectedness in religion was interconnected as well in Nizami's 12th century poem, Khosrow and Shirin, based on the 6th century legend of Persian prince and Armenian princess and their love story. This story has been interpreted throughout Islamic world in miniature paintings, films, dance, and various other artistic mediums. Finally, Achille Gorky, born Vostanik Manu Gadoyan, and Raoul Haig, born Haig Kokelakian, survivors who transformed their own experiences into a visual, universal language that captured the depth of their history as well as their survival. And here we are, 2018. Here, survival is represented by helpless and sad faces, waiting for their meal. As Ronald Sweeney writes, Dr. Ronald Sweeney writes in the World Peace magazine and describes his experience, one enters up an outside ramp lined with delicate statues of orphan children with their bowls waiting to be fed. A sad Armenian song plays. I believe artists and architects have the responsibility to generate uplifting and positive messages. And this is my interpretation. I reworked the sculptures and we worked, here are the children, orphans, which happens to be true. They built, they played, they danced, they were taught how to cook, how to bake, how to present pomegranates. And I would like this interpretation to be, these children were taught about their culture and traditions, so they could eventually fly on their own and build a future for themselves and their global communities. Before what exists right now, what I think it should be. I would like to talk a little bit about my architecture and how my art has had an impact on the architecture. This is a virtual aquarium 2009, imagining the iconic structure to symbolize Beiruit. The aquarium shapes derives from the original forms of an egg, representing beginning and birth, as well as ovular shapes used on friezes in the ancient Roman ruins of Baalbek. Undersea cameras around the world send satellite imagery to the structure, which are then projected onto the solar panels. If you analyze this, there are so many layers in here, like my ceramic, my plexiglass sculptures and other layers about different things, about sustainability, about so many different things. The aquarium makes use of tubular umbilical cord-like circulation that connects the human visitors with the marine life on display. It is an iconic form that fuses with the sea, symbolizing hope for life and of peaceful coexistence. The central structure is an integrative sculpture, hosting a wide range of community cultural and athletic activities celebrating water. It is composed of iconic buildings integrating modern structures with historic architectural elements from Caucasian, Armenian, Middle Eastern cultures, as well as remnants of archaeological elements. Details that show how historically significant traditional motifs, such as doors and even historic buildings, are integrated into the modern buildings. Water features throughout generate healing power. My inspiration for these houses were the grapevine-covered roofs found in Ashrafiyya and Bush Hamud. Grapevines provided shade in the summer and in winter allowed sunlight through. I adopted these ideas in my architectural project as described in my interview in Middle East Architect magazine in 2014 by Zainab Sawaila. This residential project illustrates my approach to the synergy of art and architecture. It integrates my wood constructions as an exterior wall, and plexiglass sculptures become railings and pergolas and sidelight for the door. I blend expressiveness and functionality. In this amphibian concert hall, the impact and movement of the waves and tides when touching the structure triggers sound and light response patterns experienced both inside and outside the structure. When this feature is turned off, regular performances events occur without distraction. This project also is inspired from light shadows of my artworks. This project adds another element to them: music created by the waves and the tides. The body of this work grew out of experience of living in a multicultural, multilingual society surrounded by multi-layered physical environments of history and archaeology. The multi-layered spaces and forms make use of both shadows and reflections that allow for multiple interpretations. A light moves across the pieces. The shadows cast by the solid bars of colors and the plexiglasses move over to the background. This piece includes fragmented words written in different languages, so the observer can make what they wish for them. The perception of the viewer changes as the pieces offer an interplay of ambiguity and reality. The act of breaking and putting pieces back together reflects self-experience of falling, rising, and reemergence, as well as spatial, societal, and personal transformation. They also reflect experiences of upheavals and suffering, war, turmoil, and destruction. Yet, despite all that, the message is one of endurance, survival, rejuvenation, and celebration. The transparencies enable the viewer to see through the hidden other. The interplay of solid shapes, light and transient shadows suggest the passing of time and the resilience of forms and ideas. Concepts developed in the multi-layered plexiglass sculptures are adapted here and taken a step further. This work will invite collaborative interaction with the artist as a way to create multiple personalized experiences. So the viewer participates by moving with the forms together and creates their own interpretations or the way they see it. Okay. At the beginning of the pandemic, we were all running around like a chicken with its head cut off. Everything seems to have been turned upside down. The pandemic changed how we had to look at things. We faced new realities and we had to make new adaptations. Relationships were profoundly reconfigured. It wasn't always clear that was the right direction to go in. It was difficult times in which we all had our crosses to bear. This flag is made of used and discarded rubber gloves I wore early in the pandemic. Clothespin hold them together, just as in those early days, it felt like the social fabric was fragile, fraying and barely holding together. Hopefully, our collective experience will bring us to a point where we can once again come together stronger and optimistic for all our future. I would like to talk about the post-COVID challenges. The challenge ahead is how shall we use the past to build our future? Doing so requires preserving the work of survivors who preceded us, which show us their creativity and resilience in face of adversity. I am proposing creation of a center that would archive the work of survivors like my father, Kazazian, Haigazian, who designed all the interiors of the Ritz-Carlton in Saudi Arabia, designed and built Antoine Constantinian, that was a world-famous jeweler who designed for royalty throughout Europe, and they were all Burj kids. My father, for example, designed and built the building on the left despite having no formal education. He also created many of the machine pieces pictured on the right, many of which were distributed throughout the Middle East, as well as prosthetic leg that manufactured and distributed. Looking to the future, these digital installations are examples of fanciful solutions to global environmental issues such as erosion and energy usage. I like to quote Sigmund Freud here, who once said, "Dreams are often most profound when they seem most crazy." The challenge for all of us is making our world a better place by participating, contributing, and working together. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nishan, for this fantastic trip and amazing gallery. I just felt, that we were somewhere in a museum going around from one place to another. I'm not going to start with my questions. Ziad, do you have a set of questions that are focused a little bit?
Yes, I have one that's particularly cogent for what Nishan has presented to us, and hopefully we'll get some great questions from others that we can draw on as well.
I have one question, if I may, before we move on, and that is taking you back to Beiruit while you're doing your teaching diploma. And that story about these delinquents or juveniles or these girls in the prisons. And, I'm a bit fascinated by what made you actually go there. Was it that the school observation required you to be in the prisons? Or did you particularly select this group? How did this happen? We're talking about the 70s, we're not talking now. And this is usually something that doesn't really happen openly very much, Can you just a little bit, yes, because it seems to have been quite an impact on your career,
Well, to answer, like the way I am here today, as we were talking to Ziad, everything is a kind of a chain reaction. Actually, I was teaching at Central High School in Ashrafiyya.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I was a student at AUB, and then there was the athletic director over there who was teaching. It seems he was also teaching to the delinquent girls. And then he told the mother superior, I put a show of their works together, which I have a slide, and the athletic director invited the mother who was taking care of them, because she was looking for someone to take care of the girls. And that's how I got into it. And it wasn't advertised, because they don't advertise. So it was connection. Of course, it's something that when you come, if you want to, you do it. If you don't want to, someone else might have said, no, I'm not interested. They're not paying enough, or they're not paying at all, or the food was that I sat down and ate with the girls. It was mostly inedible, but I had to pretend that I'm eating with them, or I ate with them. So it was, these girls were supposed to be in prison, but since they are juvenile and underage, so the convent and the Good Shepherd sister had taken care of them, had made a deal with the government, and I was working with them. And I, I'm not a Catholic. I'm not, I'm not that religious, but the way they were taking care of them, it really was very touching, especially Sister Colette Horani. And actually, I have a letter that, unfortunately, it's one of the lost things. She wrote to me afterwards, which was very touching. One of the girls, she said, they went to a trip, and she took a daisy. She said, he comes, he doesn't come. He comes, he doesn't come. So Sir Colette Hawarani asked her, who are you talking about? She said, professor of the design. So those were touching stories, that connections that built my kind of an outlook to life, to the desires, to the wishes, to circumstances, to situations. And if you have to be ready to take it, and I was ready and I wanted to take it. So everything is sort of coincidence. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. Before I give to Ziad, I just want to say to the audience that either you can write in the chat a question if you have, and I'll relate it and relate to Nishan, or you may raise your hands. There's a small sign that says raise your hand, and we'll know who has a question. So I give back to Ziad until the audience gets together and prepares the questions.
How could I see the whole thing?
I will tell you what the question is, don't worry.
This grew out of my, now what you might want to call it, my obsession with one of his works, which is from his 2020 collection. And the maybe counterpoint to the sort of intellectual camaraderie that has brought Nishan here, which is the relation, if you will, between the nation state of, Nishan, if you'll put up your 2020 image for us so that, thank you, yeah, okay, brilliant, all right. And I want to talk about the different, the way under which we intellectually and communally work to bring Nishan here to the relation between the nation state and the care networks that are going on in the United States that are particularly abysmal at this point and time, as shown by the mass ideas of privatization that have gone on in the last 40 years, and is shown by the worn care of the image that is before you. Before I talk about that briefly, I want to tell you all how I came to know of Nishan's work, because up until this past December, I had not come to know his work. I was and am currently teaching for now the fourth time since I came to Haigazian, the course in the survey for American literature. And each time I teach it, there's a new entry point, there's a new jumping off point. And I said, well, let me see if I can find something really meaningful for our current age. And it happened that I was looking at my Facebook newsfeed, and Professor Al-Aris from Dartmouth had posted a YouTube of Nishan giving a talk about his work. It was a brief talk. And at the end of this talk, you saw this image. And it was stunning to me, not only for how it questioned, of course, the way under which we see the United States, not as this big corporate image of someone athwart the world, or this great idealistic image, but one that is much more realistic to its time and place. And yet he used quite creatively that which we do every day, which is the masks and where we see the masks. So I wanted now to enter my reading that might stage a bit of what Nishan may do in his project, but from my point of view, and then I will give over to Nishan. So the title of the installation is 2020. It is 2020 considered in a still pandemic riddled 2021. As we go from mapped image of the US, washed and worn out, covered over and now backgrounded in unconvincing serviced plastics, to the material elements of precarious connection that mandates much more than the work of art itself, but its networks of care, themselves manifested like the image of the US, worn down and covered over, no longer center stage. Material, the gloves, at once formerly used by the artist, but also representing the first line of civil defense, worn. They are plastic, at once everyday cover, clothespin gripping, a cover weakly defended, coverage putting the front lines at thin and tightly stretched out threat. What of municipal services, also at the front lines, with a part of the political economy, those precariously poverty-stricken, racially handcuffed and refugee-bound that cannot but be exposed on a daily basis, unable to stay home and not provided safety from the crisis. We are more than a prosthetic ligature. We are a prosthetic, prosthetically bound up with hand-me-down suturing. Also at threat were those other centers of care, every day seen and unseen, those we officially celebrate, giving us symbolically recognized tender loving care, and now further reified in clothespins covering for their masked identity. Those who are present, but often put to the side and not often counted as necessary for running a home well. But what of those unhoused who in some instances we said served our country and put to the side, or those who were always precarious in our ever widening class disparities that are ever more also raced, and in the gaps of the uncounted, although physically present, uncounted by census takers. The work 2020 is also on the clothesline, signaling labor, usually of a gendered, then classed, then raced disparity marks called the division of labor. It is also something that in our Arab culture and sociolinguistic base is known for how clothes are put out, now traced and threadbare, nostalgic and refugee sentimental remembrances of a home we cannot return to, but in painful, resistant demand of pain to insist on. The clothesline, again, in Arab culture and sociolinguistic recall, is how we spread our news, idiomatically and scandalously so, further impacting the signs of home and homeland. Are we a land condemned to forgetfulness, as Eduardo Galeano once called America, or is art a gaze back, calling out without turning monstrous? It was a wonderful. I want to second Dinik Mekci's feeling towards your presentation, Nishan, because it at least should make many of us think differently about the current rather depressed situation that is going around globally, not just locally. But I think that one of the questions that I have been really interested in your work, and I've told you about it, is how you see your role as well as art in times of crisis, since this is the general idea behind your title that you presented us with today. And I wanted to ask you if you think that art has a reparative role to play in society. You touched on it by saying that you want, or that you see art having a positive role, but I want to know more about the reparative process.
Well, so if these are the answers for you, I never analyze my artworks beforehand. I produce them. I do not think or plan what kind of transformative impact it will have on the viewer. At every stage of the creative process, I think of different occurrences. So I think of the past, present, and the future. I try to create the artwork to be viewed in different ways from different angles. The impact of light, shadows, and use of non-compatible materials together generate certain feelings that impacts different people in different ways. I believe the viewer should personalize and interpret the artwork as they relate to them. As for ethics, it has different interpretations to different people. I believe that this ambiguity finds ways in my work. However, in architecture, it is carefully analyzed and planned, which makes it very different than producing artwork. To answer also about contextualization, it's sometimes, but not always. Like September 11 video is contextualized. However, Bleach Blood video is different. One based on facts and the other aspirations. Yet other works are a mixture of conscious and subconscious. They all project similar interpretations. Some I intend, some not. My artworks are syntheses of various issues and times a single issue. Beiruit plays a major role, not because it's personal, but because what it stands for, culturally, geographically, and otherwise. Some of them I mentioned earlier. On the other hand, coming to pandemics, which we didn't talk earlier, the single most powerful issue was global forced isolation. Changing ways of life and reconfiguring relationship, which was global, not local. So this was a global experience, forced isolation. Maybe that is why people are relating to my work differently and collectively. I remember an acquaintance sending a message on Facebook after she saw the video of my pandemic at Paris Art Museum. She said, "This pandemic and isolation is exasperating without creative acts of artists. I miss performing arts too. Your video was a cool drink on the desert." I hope this answers your question.
Certainly.
And yes?
We have a question from the audience, if we may. It says, it's from Gail Levin, who says, Nishan, what architectural project would you most like to see realized? Which of your architectural projects would you like it to be realized?
I have to read that question one more time, sorry.
Which architectural project would you
I will, yeah, okay, no. Actually, I don't build big buildings. I have worked for a firm in the past that we did big buildings, including doing the Jeddah airport and other buildings in different parts of the world. But recently during September 11th and afterwards, I'm doing a smaller scale project, so I didn't do big projects. So I haven't done big projects, but I worked on them. In fact, it's one of the buildings that I worked at SOM was destroyed during September 11th, which was the hotel. So that was one of the projects that I worked at this point. So I haven't rebuilt, but I've seen some of the buildings that I worked on be destroyed. So, so I hope this answers your question.
Ziad, I go back to you. You have something else to ask, or shall we again see?
Somebody asked the question of the zoo. No.
Because Nishan did such a great job framing the title of his talk, the question that I had in regard to that sort of drifted away. The other question that I had particularly was for him, and it's something, again, we discussed in the 2 times I've spoken with Nishan about, and he's touched on a little bit throughout this, the idea of precarious connectivity, especially, as he said, of this latest global pandemic, but certainly something that runs through his work. How does he feel about that being said about his work? Does he recognize that? Did he intend it when he was working on it? How do you feel about that
precarious connectivity you are talking about? No?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not just talking about the latest work, but your work in general.
Yeah, okay, fine. I have another question here that I will ask. I went to the chat room. I'm
Sure.
glad I had the question in the chat room because it's easier for me. Okay, precarious connectivity. Connectivity starts from the sculpture that I show at AUB. It's a Beiruit experience, and it's an experience, childhood experience and growing up experience. We are connected yet not connected. We are separate but also connected. So I don't know whether that sculpture, it shows, the answer at the time from teenage years or university years, and we all wish to be, free from the confines of different pressures. So so that's how I experienced that express that precarious connectivity by that sculpture, and also. As I saw that wood constructions, they all have openings. They all have another expectations. They all have, just opening something else. They are something that open the door for something else. So that creates kind of a precarious connection that I hope you are talking about. I hope I'm expressing. And so hopefully this kind of, just so I hope that answers your question, that precarious connectedness. So yes, I have always expressed it, throughout my works, that precarious connectedness, because it's consistent. It's our daily life that we experience. It's like on every level we experience that precarious connectedness. Sometimes we see, sometimes we don't, sometimes we had, sometimes, as I said in my presentation and my plexiglass sculptures, it's the hidden, quote unquote, it's the hidden other that you don't see, but they are there, or you see afterwards. So I think those all exist in my artworks throughout. So I hope I answered your question there as well.
Yes.
And someone asked a question about which are the architecture projects would you like to see realized?
Yes.
Well, I think I would like to realize the Beirut Aquarium. And also, I mean, it's like, I should say that, just like your children, you don't know which one do you like. So they are all my children in a way. So I think Beirut Aquarium comes, which is 2009 project, or maybe Amphibian Concerto, another project that speaks very dearly to me. And so I have recent ones also that I didn't show. But I think those two, if they realized, I'll be very happy. I hope I get someone to commission them.
Okay.
And
we have a question from Tara El Aris and a question from Karina Mugurdician. So if you want to directly address your question or write it, it's up to you. Tara El Aris, may I give you the floor? Do you have your, Tara, are you here? You're muted. I don't know. No.
Yeah, he's saying he's here.
Okay.
I don't know if he's...
Yeah. Thank you, Nishan. Thank you, Nishan, for this wonderful presentation. I mean, beautiful themes, and they show things that are broken, disconnected, but they're also an attempt to put them back together, which inspires us and gives us great hope. Which leads me to my question. You mentioned something about establishing a center for documentation in Burj Hammoud. And I'm just wondering if you can tell us more about this project, and also how this project would help the city heal, especially after the explosion, the port explosion, which is very, very close to that neighborhood. So if you can tell us more about your thoughts for that documentation center. And thank you, everyone.
Yes, I would like to. Actually, I didn't mention that, the curator from MoMA, she had organized this show at Milano Triennale. And she said that we all have to leave a legacy, some kind of a legacy, because she thinks that we are doomed for our extinction. Anyway, so, but that's not the point. So what is my legacy? What I want to put? Okay, the apartment, I own the apartment. So I don't need anybody to put. I would like, actually, with Haigazian or even at Dartmouth, first, Tarek, congratulations for your Guggenheim Fellowship. Second, congratulations for your friendship, and your comments have always helped me, our discussions, and I would like to thank you for that. Now I am going to come to the Burj Hammoud project. Since I own that apartment, since most of my father's work were inspiration about how he created those machine pieces and how he provided, and some of the pieces that, like the burners that I remember were produced and manufactured and distributed throughout the Middle East in different areas during the times of war, Second World War. So this resilience of the people have always inspired me. Like the talk of the Hagop Vezirian, being a child from Burj Hammoud who built this factory in Riyadh with 500 people and did the Ritz-Carlton interiors. I mean, it's unheard of that people like that, or Constantinian, he designed the jewelry box that the Spanish government gave to Cuba. I mean, those kids are from Burj Hammoud, and we don't hear about them. And unlike the sad figures that sit and wait for their bowl, these people build something out of nothing. And yet there is no documentation that when you go there, it's uplifting documentation. And this is not only for Burj Hammoud, I think it should be throughout Beiruit, because other people have created other things. So since I own this apartment, since the works are downstairs already, those machine pieces, beautifully handmade pieces. I mean, it's like unbelievably handmade pieces. And so I think that, since I own the apartment, I was planning to come, and I didn't come because of pandemic. I want to convert that apartment and start, hopefully Haigazian can start a course where they can teach students how to go and document, how to go and find these things. It's already a little bit too late. The shoemakers made so much wonderful designs that they provided shoes throughout Beirut. They manufacture shoes and distribute it. And all these things are lost in Beirut. There is no documentation. There is no, archival documentation. So I want the people in Beirut to see that we are creators. We are the ones who built something out of nothing. This is the energy and this is the feeling I want to go. Not kids which is not basically true, sitting there and waiting for that bowl of food. This is the image I want to give, uplifting images. And hopefully we can all work together, in building these kind of centers. So I don't know, Tarek, if that answers your question. I'm a little bit inflamed about it. So I don't know, Arda, what do you think of developing a course at Haigazian?
Actually, we do have a course that goes through the cultural heritage, like Dr. Dakistian, I don't know if with his, but he's like going through the bronzes that were made, about photography in Lebanon, about the different artisans. We know we had a conference on the Armenians of Lebanon, and many of these things are documented. But it's a good idea to go into things like, more of the sort of imaginary sort of artwork that was done through different artisans in Lebanon, in Burj Hamoud. So I would take this as a special topics course somewhere to be introduced.
Yes,
I have a question for you. Yeah, I have a question for you from.
Waste of this documentation, unfortunately, most of this, or fortunately, this documentation are done on documentations. There are books. I respect all these people who are doing documentation, but we need a physical center. We need some center that is visual, photography of lost works, maybe, or actual physical work. These physical connections add a lot to it, rather than those research being, in a library.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, fine.
And maybe even virtually,
yes,
on the websites. Yeah.
And also it could be in different areas of Beirut that they can connect.
Would you like to teach that course?
What?
Would you like to teach that course?
We will discuss about it, Arda.
Okay, so I have 3 questions coming up. One question is from Karina Magardichan, and the question is a bit long, so I'll go very slowly. She says, I noticed a lot of space present in your artwork. Fragmentation, modernism, postmodernism, maybe. How representative are these spaces in your artworks of the spaces and fragmentation you are trying to portray about life, society, and how representative or expressive does art come about in general? So the question is about the spaces in your artwork, and what is it that you really want to convey through these spaces,
Well, I believe, as I said earlier, that some of those are conscious, some of them are unconscious. I don't sit there and then just consciously create these spaces. As I said, is that when I'm working, I think of the past, present, and the future. I want these spaces for people to imagine how they are experiencing the lines, the shadows, and everything else. I don't want to give everything. I want the people to participate in it. I want these spaces to be participatory, imaginary participation in these spaces, okay, in artwork. And I don't know, Karina, if I answered your questions, and they are fragmented because fragmentation exists everywhere. Fragmentation exists within us also, not only outside us. So how do you connect this fragmentation visually, psychologically, imaginary? And of course, this is not only, as I said, it's not only personal, but also societal. We see that all over, and we grow with it. So how do we connect, and how do we connect them together in our minds? How do we connect them in our spirit? And how does it gives us another energy to go on? and to recreate something. It's the Paolo Antonelli who said that she doesn't have any hope about our future in the exhibit, that we are doomed to extinction, but she wants to leave a legacy. So I want a person to build their legacy within themselves and hopefully in relationship to other people around us. So I don't know if this answers the questions or not, but Karina, I'm glad.
Yes, you sure did. Thank you, Professor, it says. And then we have another question, which I think could be an interesting topic for another lecture. It's from Benji Boyajian, who says, thank you, Nishan, for this wonderful talk. I have an open question. A lot of your work looks to the future. Could you talk about the notion of utopia? So could be another lecture, but if you have something to...
maybe Tarek can answer that question. I think many people, the notion of utopia, of course, exists throughout the history, and there are many approaches to the utopia. And I can say, actually, the works I am showing over here, actually the final works, you can see the screen. If you can see the screen, I say these are fanciful solutions, global environmental issues such as usage of energy consumption. These structures can serve aesthetically satisfying erosion barrier and fantasy solar panels. So we can live, hopefully, in this structure. Maybe these structures become, habitable. And I have another, which is on YouTube, another project about talking about a YouTube video, which called Fluid City. Fluid City is like objects that they fold one to another, and then they fly to another city. So if you go to YouTube, Google me, you see Fluid City, you can see that there. So I didn't want to show that here, but with your question, and so these areas it's my utopia. If the water rises, everything comes, we can still live there. We can create life in these images. So I think that, I hope, Benji, I answered your question over there. So it's my utopia, creation of my utopia.
Thank you. I have Ziad, do you have another question, or should I?
I'm good. I'm good.
Okay. I have a question that may be a little bit painful. I don't know. But as you were giving us your presentation, you went over a number of items and you said they are lost.
Yes.
My question is, how did they get lost? Is it from Marash to Beirut? From Beirut to New York?
My art,
from New York to New York?
Well, I don't want to open wings. My artwork were lost from my apartment, actually.
In Beirut?
Yes, and from the studio I have. So it's like they were there. Some of them were there. Some of them were given to some people. But unfortunately, I had slides, and the slides were very carefully photoshopped. I had the slides, bad slides, but we photoshopped them in order to make them, look modern. So I have documentation of other works, and some I don't have. Actually, some I remember. So actually, I remember something very interesting. After I lost these works, I was extremely upset, of course, to use the word upset, not depressed. But I had a psychiatrist friend. She was a friend of a friend. She said, Nishan, why are you so upset? Create new things. Go on, do other things. So I still remember her words. She was sitting in my living room, actually, Laura. And Laura said, I remember this dialogue. So it gave me, sometimes you need someone else to bring something and then in you and generate these feelings. And so that's how I think that unfortunately, I would say about 50% of my work's lost, if not more. And so that's where I am. But then it is what it is. It's life. I mean, we lose a lot of things and we go on, we get depressed. So that's what happened.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think that we don't have any more questions. So if there are no more, if you have anything to say, Nishan, I can give you the floor. But I would like to thank you. Thank you very much for this first meeting, shall I say, because I think this is going to be a series. We're going to start them soon with you as soon as we can get our world organized. But thank you for Zoom again for getting us this opportunity. Next time you're in Beirut, we hope to host you in our auditorium where you have done so many things in the past. And so I thank the audience again for being with us. I thank Ziad from Atlanta for being early in the morning with us, you both of you. So
it's not early,
Haigazian
11
is so
o'clock.
happy to be, yes. I'm looking if there's anybody who has anything to ask, but I think that we're okay. So thank you very much and have a great day and keep on creating so we can have more of these presentations in the near future. So
Thank you very much.
I wish you all the best and I wish that we can all overcome the pandemic in our different ways. Not all of us are as creative as you are, so we have to find different devices to be able to overcome our Lebanese scene. You know, that would really need, I think, more than just painting. It would need, I think, miracles. So we will pray for that. Thank you again, both of you, and thank you for the audience. And hope to see you soon in the near future. Thank you. So Nishan, if you have a few words to say, and Ziad, I can leave you to go in peace.
No, thank you. Just thank you. Thank you is more than enough.
Thank you very much.
I hope I see you soon, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Oh, there was another question. I'm sorry, but it's can I give you another question from Bedros Kazazian?
Okay.
And he says, he probably is a family member, yeah. He says, based on your life experiences and how you were able to channel your experiences of political and social adversities, what is your advice to young artists and creative professionals?
Everybody has their own experiences and everybody has their own expressions, the way they want to express. I don't want to suggest what anybody should do, what I do, because we are all products of different circumstances, and and then how we relate to them, how to react to them. It's based on our many things that we go through, and so my experience is totally different. As you mentioned, working with delinquent girls, the impact of talking to Dr. Van Mierlo, having the Anais Ohannessian class experiences. So my experience is through my experiences and my life, my experiences, what I've seen. Those are my works. I believe it's unique to me. So maybe other people can see this process and apply to them, or get rejuvenated, or get more excited about it. And I think that's what it is, you know. So that's it.
Okay,
all right.
Thank you again. Thank you very much again. And I would like also to thank our IT services for organizing this Zoom and efficiently, you know, it was a miracle that we out of Lebanon did not have an internet cut, so, or a power cut. So we are thankful for that too. And I wish you all a good day, a good week, and thanks very much. Okay.
Thank you very much. Goodbye. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. See you soon.